Welcome to Lying and Cheating. Please like this video and subscribe. Lying and Cheating. I'm 32 now, and looking back at the last 5 years of marriage with my wife, it feels like things have completely changed. I still remember the day we got married. We were standing there, hand in hand, and I thought to myself, this is it. This is who I'll spend the rest of my life with. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just pure certainty that we were a perfect match. But now, a year into what feels like a long and unrecognizable distance between us, I wonder if I even know her anymore. In some strange way, it feels like I'm married to a stranger. We started off strong. My wife and I were both doing well in our careers when we first met. It was one of those relationships where everything seemed to fall into place naturally. We connected over so many things: shared values, similar goals, and a love for adventure. I was working my way up in the coding industry, and she had already carved out a successful path in management. On paper, we looked great together. We had what seemed like the perfect setup. But over time, the little cracks began to show. I didn't take the usual route in life. I didn't go to college right after high school. Instead, I chose a trade school, and that decision shaped my entire career. It wasn't easy. The first few years after I finished my training were rough. I remember the long hours I spent working for pennies at entry-level jobs, trying to prove myself. Every project I took on felt like it could be the one that finally opened doors for me, but it was a slow climb. I had to earn my place in a world that didn't always respect the path I took. Still, I stuck with it. Coding is my passion, and with time, my work began to speak for itself. Slowly but surely, I built a reputation. People started to recognize my skills, and eventually, my portfolio and references became my greatest assets. My wife, on the other hand, took a more traditional path. She earned her undergraduate degree, went on to get her master's, and eventually landed a management role at a well-known company. She had the kind of resume you could put in a frame on the wall. I respected that about her. But as we started building our lives together, I began to notice a subtle difference in the way we viewed work, education, and success. It's hard to put into words, but there was a tension there. A tension that I thought was just a bit of fun rivalry between us. In hindsight, I can see it was something more. I used to vent about my work a lot in the beginning. Coding isn't always a smooth ride, and the worst part for me was dealing with middle management. These were the people who stood between me and getting my job done. They'd throw in unnecessary steps, demand last-minute changes, and push deadlines that were nearly impossible to meet. It felt like they had no idea what developers really do. To me, they were just obstacles, people who didn't understand the technical side of things, making decisions that slowed me down. But my wife had a completely different perspective. She would always defend middle management. They have to juggle a lot of different priorities, she'd say. They're the ones making sure everything runs smoothly. That used to really get under my skin. I couldn't understand how she could side with people who, in my mind, were making my life harder for no good reason. The thing is, she had never met my manager, but she would always assume he had a bigger picture in mind. He probably sees things you don't, she'd tell me, as if I was the one missing something. After a while, I just stopped talking to her about work. What was the point? It seemed like she always took their side, no matter how ridiculous their decisions were. So, I kept my thoughts to myself unless it was something worth celebrating, like a raise or a day off. Those were the only stories from work that felt safe to share. There was something else too. I always felt like my wife had a bit of resentment toward the fact that I hadn't gone back to school for a 4-year degree or a master's. She brought it up a lot in the early days. She'd encourage me to think about going back to school, saying it would open more doors for me. And sure, maybe she was right. But the thought of taking on that kind of debt just didn't sit well with me. I wasn't about to throw myself into student loans when I was already doing fine without a degree. When I laid out the numbers for her, the cost, the years it would take to pay off, she dropped it. After that, it didn't come up again. We were both lucky enough to be mostly debt-free when we got married, and our incomes were fairly close at the time, so the topic was put to rest. Or so I thought. 2 years ago, I landed a new job that changed everything for me. This was a company that really valued what I brought to the table. The owner actually took the time to talk to me directly, and he recognized my skills. He saw potential in me, and he respected the work I had put in to get where I was. It felt good to be seen in that way. Now, I'm making 50% more than my wife, and the person I report to is someone who works with me, not against me. He's not overly technical, but he knows enough to manage the team without micromanaging. He gets it. He understands what it means to trust people to do their jobs. I describe him as the perfect scrum master. He steps in when needed, but mostly lets me handle my work. It's a night and day difference from the managers I had before. The first few years of our marriage were really good. Looking back, we didn't fight much, and we managed to avoid the big blow-ups that can strain a relationship. I stopped complaining to her about my managers, and she stopped trying to convince me to go back to school. It felt like we were both content with the life we had. We had fun together too. We went out for date nights a few times a month, tried out new restaurants, explored different hobbies together. We even cooked meals side by side in the kitchen, flipping through recipes and laughing about who was the better chef. At night, we'd sit in the living room, reading books or watching movies. There was a real sense of togetherness. I thought we were happy, but when the pandemic hit, everything changed. Like so many others, we started working from home during the lockdown. At first, it seemed like a blessing in disguise. We had the space for it. Our house has 3 extra bedrooms, rooms we had always talked about turning into nurseries for when we eventually had kids. But for now, they were just spare rooms. One of them was already set up as my home office, so when lockdown began, we turned another one into an office for my wife. Even though we were working from the same house, it became clear pretty quickly that we had very different ideas about what working from home looked like. I've always been someone who thrives on structure. Without it, I get restless and unfocused. So, I stuck to a routine. Every morning, I would get up, make breakfast, take a shower, shave, and then put on a full suit and tie, even though I wasn't going into an office. I know it sounds strange, but for me, it was a way to switch gears mentally. Wearing a suit, even at home, helped me get into the mindset that it was time to work. It kept me disciplined. My wife, on the other hand, couldn't have been more different. She didn't see the point in dressing up if she wasn't going anywhere. Most days, she'd roll out of bed in the late morning and start working in her pajamas. There was no routine for her, no structure. She would just plop down at her desk, open her laptop, and dive into her work. I didn't say anything at first because it wasn't my place to tell her how to manage her workday, but the difference between us became more and more apparent as the weeks went on. While I'm waking up every morning, putting on a suit, and gearing myself up for a day of work, my wife takes a completely different approach. She rolls out of bed, casually eats breakfast, brushes her teeth, and then slips into her comfy t-shirt and sweatpants before wandering into her home office with her iPad. I watch her settle in, occasionally picking up her device to play Candy Crush between checking emails. To me, it feels like work from home, but for her, it's just work from home. I often wonder if this was what we had signed up for. The irony isn't lost on me. Here we are, married, and yet, I feel like we're miles apart. It's strange how being physically close can lead to such emotional distance. Her office door is wide open most of the day, and I can hear her discussing projects and plans with her colleagues in their video calls. She's involved in several meetings, making decisions and brainstorming strategies. On the flip side, I have only one daily meeting, a quick scrum, and I prefer to conduct it behind closed doors. I need that space to focus. But 5 months ago, she confronted me about it, her voice tinged with irritation. "Why do you always close the door?" "It feels insulting," she said, her eyes narrowing as she watched me. I tried explaining that it's for peace, to help me concentrate on my work. But to her, it felt like I was hiding something. I wanted to maintain our hobbies, the things that had once brought us joy together, but every time I suggested it, she brushed off my attempts. "We see each other all day as is," she'd say dismissively. I should have pressed the issue, should have fought harder to keep that connection alive, but I didn't. In my mind, I thought the lockdown was a temporary situation, and I didn't act as if it was a permanent shift in our lives. The change was subtle at first, like the gradual dimming of lights, but it became more apparent as time went on. It got really bad when her company decided to institute a partial office reopening. The moment she heard the news, she practically jumped at the chance to return to the office, joining the 50% of her colleagues who were allowed back in. I couldn't blame her. I missed the camaraderie and the structure of an office environment too. My company hadn't opened our offices yet, but I felt content working remotely as long as I had access to my development environment. However, it wasn't just the office that was changing for her. I began to suspect that some of her coworkers were getting into her head. After her work hours, she started staying late, hanging out with them for drinks and gatherings. Each time she left, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. I pressed her for details, wanting to know more about what she was up to, but she grew more secretive and guarded. The warmth I once felt in our home faded, replaced by a coldness that made it feel more like I was living with a roommate than a wife. Last month, during one of those weekends when she was out, she casually dropped her old iPad on my desk and said, "Can you wipe this? I want to gift it to my niece." I shrugged. It was typical for me to handle these little tech chores for family, and I didn't think much of it. After she left for another company gathering, I turned on the iPad, ready to reset it. But something compelled me to look inside instead of just doing the factory reset. Perhaps it was a gut feeling, or maybe I was just too curious. I was hit by an odd mix of dread and intrigue as I scrolled through the device. What I found made my heart race and my blood run cold. Her messaging app was filled with a flurry of activity, photos, videos, and instant messages with someone I didn't recognize at first. Then it hit me. They were from her boss. They had been having an affair for the past 2 months. The realization was gut-wrenching. I felt as if my entire body turned to ice. It reminded me of that scene in Equilibrium when the polygraph flatlined. My heart raced while my mind reeled in disbelief and betrayal. I copied everything, the texts, the images, and the videos, packaging it all into cloud storage that I used for my development projects, separate from work. I knew I had to protect myself. Initially, I didn't confront her. I was paralyzed, unsure of what to do next. A whirlwind of emotions engulfed me. I felt numb, yet somehow as if I were trudging through water, heavy and slow. She either didn't notice or didn't care about the distance that had grown between us. By this point, our relationship was hanging by a thread. We were in what I'd call the roommate stage, drifting through life side by side without any real connection. I took the next step. I contacted a lawyer. He understood the urgency of the situation and wanted to gather as much evidence as possible before moving forward. He advised me to keep my mouth shut for now, suggesting I hire a private investigator. He recommended someone who could dig deeper and provide the solid evidence I needed. For the last 4 weeks, the investigator had been compiling evidence, and my lawyer was preparing the divorce filing. "Be patient," he kept saying, his voice steady as he reassured me. My veins felt like they were filled with ice. Yet her indifference made it easier to hold on to my composure for the time being. But the weight of the situation grew heavier each day. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Just yesterday, I got a call from my lawyer, who told me the filing was almost ready. The excitement in his voice was almost palpable. "I have the filing almost ready," he said, the words hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. "Our state has at-fault divorce laws, and the private investigator got solid proof, photos, videos, and texts. This is practically a slam dunk." A rush of adrenaline coursed through me as I felt the gravity of the moment. My heart raced, pounding in my chest as I realized how close I was to confronting her with the truth. Yet, the thought filled me with dread. I knew I had to eventually confront her, but I wasn't sure when or how. The truth was lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. I was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss that was about to open up. My mind raced with possibilities. What would happen when the truth finally came out? How would she react when I confronted her with the evidence? Would she deny it? Or would she finally admit the betrayal? With each passing moment, I felt the tension building within me. I could either choose to confront her or wait for the lawyer to take the next steps. I knew I couldn't live in this limbo forever. I was a heartbeat away from uncovering the final act of this painful drama, and I could feel the anticipation gnawing at me. All I knew was that the next move I made could change everything. Then, last night, something inside me snapped. The icy numbness that had gripped me for weeks ignited into a fiery rage. My wife came home late, her usual nonchalance in full swing, and I don't even recall the exact words she said to me. But I erupted, feeling a surge of emotions that had been bottled up for far too long. "I hope it was worth fucking your boss," I shouted, the anger boiling over, and I felt a wild mix of relief and horror as the words left my mouth. Her reaction was instantaneous, mean, nasty, and vindictive. She shot back, claiming I wasn't there for her emotionally, that I was just lounging all day at home, even though I was the one earning the majority of our income. "You're not intellectually stimulating," she accused, her voice sharp, as if my highly technical job held no weight in her eyes. When I revealed that I had consulted a lawyer, her laughter cut through the tension like a knife. She laughed, really laughed, as if my pain was nothing more than a joke. "Your bluff is pathetic," she sneered, her face twisted in contempt. "There's no way you would leave me. Even if you did, I would get half your paycheck. Stay with me, and you'll at least get to have sex occasionally. Don't mess this up." In that moment, it struck me. I was staring at a woman I didn't recognize, a stranger who had replaced the partner I once knew. "That's not a marriage," I shouted back, desperation creeping into my voice, my heart racing. But she simply laughed again, a sound that felt more like a taunt than a genuine response. "Honey, this is the 21st century. A woman can have her cake and eat it too," she quipped, her laughter ringing in my ears like a death knell. She then sauntered off to bed, leaving me seething and alone, struggling to process the emotional whirlwind that had just erupted between us. I sat there, my mind racing as I grabbed my phone and shot off an email to my boss, requesting a week off to handle a family issue. He granted it without hesitation, probably sensing the distress in my voice. That night, I spent hours on the couch in my office, replaying every moment of our conversation. The next morning, as I got dressed, she left without so much as a glance my way, casually tossing over her shoulder, "Don't wait up." The weight of betrayal felt heavier than ever, but I was resolute. I marched into my lawyer's office, ready to take control of my life. He informed me that the divorce papers were prepared. He also had a process server with him and asked how I wanted the papers served. An idea struck me like lightning, and I told him my plan. He laughed nervously, trying to dissuade me. "You better not do that. I've had so many clients want to serve papers in a cute or revenge manner, and I always talk them out of it. Judges do not have a sense of humor," he cautioned, but I was done being passive. "Enough is enough," I said, my voice low and determined. I want her to feel what I felt. The lawyer tried to reason with me, but eventually, he relented upon seeing the fierce determination in my eyes. The process server caught wind of my plan and chuckled, "You're my hero." I had to special order something, an extravagant cake with a custom image that would serve as my final blow. It came at a rush cost, but I didn't care. I wanted to send a message. The process server took off to pick it up, ready to deliver my vengeful surprise along with the divorce papers to my wife's workplace. Once it was done, he came back to tell me what happened. "I showed up at her office with this large box," he explained, still chuckling at the absurdity of it all. "I found your wife chatting and laughing with her coworkers. When I asked for her name," she confirmed, looking curious about what it was about. "I put the box on a nearby desk, opened it, and there it was, a cake, custom-made with an image printed on it in frosting. I didn't even know that was a thing until this morning." The image depicted my wife in a warm embrace with her boss. They were fully clothed, but the implication was unmistakable. Above the image, in bright icing, it read, "Here's your cake. Eat it." As the process server recounted the scene, I felt a rush of adrenaline surge through me. He said my wife screeched when she saw it, her face turning white as all the laughter and chatter around her came to a screeching halt. At least 8 witnesses in the office saw the cake and the papers. My wife freaked out, swatting the cake box off the table. It crashed onto the carpet, the image still visible, leaving her coworkers stunned. Some of them began berating her, and I could imagine the embarrassment and humiliation washing over her as she broke down, crying and screaming in that office. The process server took a hasty retreat, leaving the chaos behind him. Meanwhile, my phone blew up with notifications. I kept sending her calls to voicemail, ignoring the flood of texts that were surely pouring in. I didn't even want to read them. Hours passed, and she hadn't come home. Instead, her mother texted me, saying my wife was going to stay at their place for now. The euphoric rush of having delivered the cake felt amazing, almost intoxicating. I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph as I imagined her humiliation. But as the hours stretched on, that rush began to fade, replaced by doubt. I started reconsidering my lawyer's warnings. Did I just mess everything up? Had I let my anger lead me to a choice that could cost me more than just my marriage? What would the fallout be? I found myself pacing back and forth, the gravity of the situation sinking in deeper. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again, and I saw a message pop up from my wife. "You have no idea what you just did. You think this is over? You've made a huge mistake." A chill ran down my spine. What did she mean by that? My heart raced as I realized the situation was more complex than I had anticipated. I thought I had taken control, but it felt as though I had unwittingly opened a Pandora's box. I sat there, staring at the screen, anxiety gnawing at me. The game was far from over. The stakes had just been raised, and I was left wondering what her next move would be. As I mulled over her cryptic message, a thought struck me. Was this a mere play for sympathy? Or was she plotting some sort of retaliation? My mind raced with possibilities. Each scenario felt more harrowing than the last. Would she retaliate with more deception? Or would she come clean? And just as I began to collect my thoughts, my phone chimed once more. This time, it was a video file she had sent me, titled, "For Your Eyes Only." I hesitated before clicking it, my heart pounding. I was already deep into the emotional abyss, and this felt like it could tip me over the edge. With a deep breath, I hit play. The screen flickered to life, revealing a grainy recording of my wife in her office, laughter echoing as she bantered with her colleagues. But then, it shifted to her pulling her boss aside, their body language shifting to something far more intimate. I felt my heart drop as I watched them exchange furtive glances and whispers, my stomach twisting into knots. I realized then that this story had layers I hadn't even begun to uncover. I was no longer sure if I was the hero or the fool in this narrative. And just as the video faded to black, I was left with more questions than answers, each one echoing in my mind like a haunting refrain. What had I unleashed, and would I ever truly be free from this emotional quagmire? The clock ticked on, but my heart raced with uncertainty. I felt like a player in a high-stakes game, and I was starting to wonder if I had the cards to play. Welcome to Lying and Cheating. Please like this video and subscribe. Lying and Cheating.